At 5:30 in the morning my kitchen was quiet. The air smelled like coffee and night rain warming off the pavement. A thin ribbon of light slipped between the blinds and touched the rim of my mug. My phone hummed against the table, a soft tremble that nudged the spoon. I reached for it without thinking, the way you reach for a habit. At the top of the screen sat our group thread, the one that used to say family dinner and always made me smile. I blinked once, then twice. The title had changed. Hayes Family Only. I stared at the new words, neat as a label on a storage box, and felt something in my chest shift out of place. A second bubble waited beneath the title. A private message from Tiffany. Please do not come tonight. It is for immediate family. I hope you understand. My thumb hovered as if a different answer could appear if I held still. Immediate family. I said it out loud quietly to hear how it tasted. The room did not answer. The coffee cooled, the clock clicked, the refrigerator hummed. I scrolled to the top of the thread and watched old pictures rush by like a short film. Andre laughing in my backyard with the grill smoking behind him. Tiffany smiling over a bowl of my collard greens, saying this is so good in a careful voice that never quite found warmth. A cake on a paper plate where someone had cut my name crooked. Family dinner used to mean bring what you can and stay as long as you like. It used to mean I make cornbread, you bring tea, we pass stories along with the salt. It used to mean my door, our table, the same prayer at the start and the same soft thank you at the end. The light moved across the phone and threw a small glare. A shine like a tear you refused to wipe. I opened Tiffany's message again, slow, as if each word might change its mind. Please do not come. It is for immediate family. I hope you understand. The sentence asked me to be polite about my own erasing. I set the phone down and tried to steady my breath. The neighborhood garbage truck groaned past. A bird called from the maple tree. Somewhere far off a bell rang, 3 even notes that sounded like a memory. I looked at the pecan Danish on the plate, still sweet with glaze, still warm enough to soften at the edges. I had planned to take a half to their place later, because feeding my people has always been my language. I lifted the pastry and then set it down. My hand did not know what to do when there was no welcome at the end of the road. I told myself there had to be a mistake. Maybe the title changed by accident. Maybe a cousin handled the phone and typed the wrong thing. Maybe immediate family meant something else tonight that still had room for a mother who stood in every doorway of his childhood. I opened the kitchen window a little and let the air in. It smelled like wet grass and early promises. The phone shook again. A new message dropped like a stone into a quiet lake. Please respect our space tonight. We will include you another time. My name was not in the sentence. I felt the way a picture frame feels when the nail slips from the wall. I did not cry. I watched the steam fade from the coffee. I pressed my palm against the table to remind myself that I was still here. That would held. That mornings come even when invitations do not. I lifted the phone one more time and looked at my reflection in the black corner of the screen. A faint outline of a woman who has cooked and prayed and waited. What does a mother do when she stops being family? The phone sat heavy in my hand before I finally pressed Andre's name. The ring sounded longer than usual, or maybe silence had stretched itself inside each tone. When his voice came, it was calm but rushed, the kind of tone a man uses when he is talking from a hallway and watching who is listening. Hey ma, everything all right? I cleared my throat and kept my words even. I just saw a message from Tiffany. She said dinner tonight is for immediate family. I wanted to check if that's right. There was a pause long enough for the coffee to go cold. Then he said softly, yeah ma, Tiffany just wants it simple. We will do something with you later. The way he said later had no date on it. Later could mean a week or a season or never. I let the sentence sit there, waiting to see if he would rescue it with something warmer, but he didn't. Later has been our place for a long time, I said, and the quiet that followed felt like a closed door. He exhaled into the phone. Ma, please don't take it personal. She has been stressed trying to make everything perfect. You know how she gets. I smiled though he could not see it. I know exactly how she gets. I get quiet, she gets perfect. I wanted to say that, but I swallowed it like bitter medicine. Instead I asked, so you don't want me to come? He hesitated again, and that hesitation told the truth his words would only decorate. It's just one night, he said. We will plan something next week, maybe Sunday lunch. I heard a car door close on his end, then another voice calling his name. The conversation had already moved away from me while my phone still pressed to my ear. Alright baby, I said, take care. I love you. Love you too, ma, he replied, quick, automatic, like a signature at the end of an email. The line went dead. I stayed still for a long moment, listening to the silence between clicks. The refrigerator motor kicked in again. Outside, the garbage truck made another pass. I poured what was left of my coffee into the sink. The dark liquid swirled down, thin and careless. Later, that word echoed. It used to mean hope. Now it only meant postponement. I looked at the mug ring on the table and traced it with my finger. A perfect circle where warmth used to be. I went to the window and watched the street wake up. Mr. and Mrs. Daniels were walking their dog, heads bent close like they shared one breath. Across the street, a teenage boy waited for his ride to school, backpack slung low, earphones in. Life moved as if nothing had shifted, yet my world felt rearranged. My son had spoken gently, respectfully, but the message underneath was hard. You stay over there. We will call you when we need you. I thought about calling again, insisting, reminding him of everything I had done, but pride and love wrestled inside me until both were too tired to move. I sat back down, folded my hands, and stared at the phone. When Andre was little, he used to run home from school, shouting for me before he even reached the porch. Now I had to call first, text first, wait for permission to step into the same room. The difference between then and now was only a few sentences and a lifetime of distance. I could still hear his voice, calm, trained to keep peace. I realized he had learned that from me. All those years I smoothed over every problem, every slight, telling him to be kind, to let things go. Now he was doing the same thing to me, letting me go politely. The kettle clicked off. A soft reminder that morning didn't wait for feelings. I poured fresh water and made another cup. The taste was flat, but I drank it anyway. I walked to the sink again and looked at my reflection in the window, the outline of my face against the pale light. Somewhere down the street a church bell rang, one long note followed by two short. I used to count those rings to know the hour. Now they sounded like a question. How did we get here? How does a mother fall out of her child's calendar? I pressed my hand to the glass and whispered without meaning to, later has been our place for a long time. Then I turned off the phone, folded the dish towel, and began the slow work of pretending the morning was ordinary. I am 66 years old, and I have learned that some truths arrive like a knock and some drift in like a draft under the door, and the quiet ones are the ones that change your house. My name is Claudia Mae Johnson. 18 years ago I buried my husband on a soft gray morning, and that afternoon I went back to work because the light bill does not pause for sorrow. I raised my son Andre in a small brick home on a street where the mailman knows your name and neighbors wave from their porches. I worked mornings in a school cafeteria stirring big silver pans of oatmeal and grits. Then I cleaned offices 3 nights a week until the floors shone like they were proud of themselves. On Sundays I cooked at church for repast dinners, the kind where the plates are heavy and the prayers are gentle. Collard greens simmered beside cornbread, and sweet tea beaded the pitcher with little pearls of water. I moved like a metronome in those years, steady and useful, counting time by lunch bells and evening buses and the hiss of my iron. I did not have much, but I had what mattered to me. I had a boy who came home smelling like grass and school dust. I had a front room where his homework spread like maps across the coffee table. I had a porch where summer crickets sang and the moon slid over the roof like a slow blessing. When money was thin I saved coins in a jar under the sink and told Andre that miracles often wear small clothes. When the rent went up I learned how to say no to anything that did not keep the lights on or help him grow. I sewed buttons back on his shirts and patched his knees and whispered little instructions to the Lord while buses coughed at the corner. At church I stood in the choir even when my voice was tired, because singing taught my chest to hold more air than grief. If you ask me what I believe, I will tell you I believe family is a verb, something you do, not just a word you say. You wash the dishes even when it is not your turn. You sit in parking lots during school programs and cheer for names that are not your child, because they belong to children who belong to your village. You bring pound cake to people who are grieving and potato salad to people who are celebrating, and you remember that both crowds need water and a nap. I showed Andre what I knew about being a decent man. Look people in the eye. Return your cart. Tell the truth before the truth tells on you. I taught him recipes and budgets and the difference between a first draft and a finished thing. I taught him that a key means trust and that trust is not a coat you wear only on Sundays. When my knees began to ache in the winter, I learned new ways to do old work. I sat to peel sweet potatoes. I rolled laundry baskets with my hip. I made friends with ice packs and shoes that understood me. I told myself it was alright to slow down because slowing down is not the same thing as giving up. I watched Andre become a man with a job and a tie and a voice that could fix things over the phone. The first time he paid for dinner he looked shy and proud and I pretended not to notice, which is a kind of blessing mothers give their sons. When he told me about Tiffany I listened with open hands. He said she was careful with calendars and liked her spices measured. He said she liked quiet restaurants and would rather read than argue. I told him quiet can be peace and it can be distance, and only time will tell which one it is. He laughed and said I always find the middle of a matter. I wanted his life to be roomy. I wanted him to laugh in kitchens that were not mine and to stand at windows that faced different streets. A mother who loves right understands that love and letting go are twins who share a heartbeat. Still, a mother is also a person and a person notices when the air changes. Calls grew shorter. Visits became calendar items that bumped like furniture in a crowded room. The old ease that lived between my door and his began to thin the way a favorite sweater thins at the elbows, not from neglect, but from too much single-direction wear. I told myself to be gracious. I told myself to remember that marriage is a tightrope for new people, and that in-laws must learn the wind before they can offer a hand. I showed up with food and left with empty pans and said thank you for the evening even when the evening had more silence than talk. I would stand at my sink, rinse dishes, and tell the Lord I am not asking for a throne, just a chair in the corner. My life stayed simple. I kept the house clean mostly. I paid the bills on time. I went to Bible study and took notes like the teacher might call on me. I kept my pantry steady and my porch plants alive. Some mornings I woke before the bell and sat at the table with my coffee and watched the light learn my kitchen. That light knows me. It knows the shape of my hands and the rhythm of my breath. In it I remember that I am more than a mother, though mother is a holy name. I am a woman who worked and cooked and forgave and trying counts. I am a friend to women on my block who knock on my door and say they need to sit down for a minute. I am the one who remembers birthdays even when the world is loud. I am the person who can fix a hem with a safety pin and face a bill with a phone call and calm a room with a hymn. So when messages arrive that move my chair out of the corner and hang a new sign on the room, I do not forget who I am. I am the one who kept the light on. I am the one who held the door open. I am the one who believes family is something you do. Memory is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive when you call it. It drifts in like smoke through a crack, curling where it pleases. That morning after Andre's call, I sat at the table with my hands around the mug and let the memories come. They began with the sound of rain on the old tin roof of our first apartment, the year he turned 8. He had asthma then, bad enough that I slept sitting up, listening to each breath the way a sailor listens to waves. One night he woke gasping. I remember scooping him in my arms, running through the rain, barefoot because I didn't have time to find my shoes. The emergency room smelled like bleach and panic. When they finally placed the mask over his little face and the wheezing softened, I whispered every prayer I knew. By sunrise he was smiling weakly and said, "Mama, I'm hungry." I went home, changed into my cafeteria uniform, and made it to work before the breakfast bell rang. The manager looked surprised to see me. I just told her parents don't get sick days. I remember how the steam from those big pans of oatmeal fogged my glasses, how I blinked and kept stirring because if I stopped moving, I'd think about the hospital bill I couldn't pay yet. That night when I got home Andre was coloring at the table, humming to himself. He said, "I drew us at the hospital. You look like a superhero, Mama." I laughed until tears came, and for a moment the world felt safe again. Years later, when he wanted to go to a computer camp across town, the fee was more than my rent. I sewed pillowcases for 3 weekends straight, and sold them to a boutique owner who said she liked my patterns. I saved every dollar in a jar labeled Future. I told Andre it was for him, but truthfully it was for both of us, proof that hope can fit inside glass if you feed it small coins. When the day came, I handed him the envelope and told him, "Go learn something I never could." He kissed my cheek and promised he'd make me proud. I told him he already had. I can still see him that morning in the doorway with his backpack too big for his shoulders and the sunlight behind him making a halo out of dust. At his 16th birthday, I wanted to give him something bigger than money could buy. So I cooked his favorites, fried chicken and mac and cheese, collard greens and sweet tea. The house smelled like home and music. His friends filled every chair, laughter spilling into the hall. When I brought out the cake, he hugged me tight and said, "I'll never forget what you did, Ma." That night after everyone left, I sat at the kitchen table and picked wax from the candles, smiling at the quiet. I didn't know then that silence could grow sharp years later. College was another mountain. He got a small scholarship, but not enough. I worked double shifts, cleaned on Saturdays, and skipped new shoes for 2 years so he could stay enrolled. When I sent him off, the bus driver called out, "You raised him right, Ms. Johnson." I waved and said, "I just followed the manual God gave me." The apartment felt too big after that. I filled the rooms with motion, mopping, folding, humming. I marked his calls on a calendar like appointments with joy. In those days I thought distance meant growth, not loss. Then came the memory that stung most. The first Thanksgiving after his graduation. I had polished the silver tray, baked pies, and set the table for 3. The call came at 4 that afternoon. "Ma, Tiffany's family invited us over. We'll swing by later if we can." Later never came. I put the food away piece by piece, wrapping warmth into foil. Around 9, I sat at the table with 1 slice of pie and told myself it was all right, that young people need their own traditions. I remember the hum of the refrigerator, the same note it made last night, and how that hum sounded like company back then. Another picture surfaced. The day I first met Tiffany. She was polite, hands folded neatly, eyes scanning my small living room like she was checking the measurements of a memory. I had cooked too much, of course. Baked mac and cheese bubbling golden, cornbread shining with butter, sweet potatoes glazed with brown sugar. She ate quietly, said thank you twice, and smiled the kind of smile that ends before it reaches the eyes. Andre seemed nervous, explaining every little thing. The photos on the wall, the plastic covers on the couch, my habit of saving grocery bags in a drawer. After they left, I stood at the sink and watched their taillights fade. I told myself I'd get used to her way. Love teaches you to stretch. But some stretches leave you sore. I remember the second Christmas after their wedding. They had moved into a bigger house in a new development where the sidewalks looked too clean to touch. I brought a homemade quilt, stitched with our family initials, thinking it might remind them of roots. Tiffany accepted it like a document to file. "Thank you, Ms. Johnson," she said, folding it too quickly. The next week I saw a picture online. Their living room decorated, a store-bought throw on the couch that matched the curtains. My quilt was nowhere in sight. I didn't cry. I just learned something. Sometimes love is not refused, it's quietly misplaced. There are softer memories too. The mornings when Andre and I would sit on the porch before school, sharing a biscuit and talking about nothing. The time he won the spelling bee and looked straight at me instead of the crowd when they handed him the ribbon. The way he used to shout from the field, "Did you see that, Ma?" I always did. I saw every stumble and every rise. I was the keeper of his beginnings. Maybe that is why this new silence feels heavier. Carries the weight of everything we once said easily. As I sat there in the kitchen, the light shifted from gold to white. The pecan Danish was gone, the crumbs small as sand. I thought about the word family and how it changes shape depending on who is saying it. When Andre was little, it meant whoever shows up. Now it seems to mean whoever fits in the picture. I picked up my old photo album from the counter. The one with cracked corners and pages that smell faintly of lemon oil. The first page holds a picture of Andre at 5, missing 2 front teeth, holding a paper crown from Sunday school. On the back I had written Our Joy 1993. The ink had faded, but the truth had not. I flipped through the years, school dances, birthdays, church picnics. Every photo carried the same invisible caption. We were enough. I traced one with my finger and whispered I did my part. I gave you everything that didn't come with instructions. And then out of nowhere, a memory I had not touched in years. The night before he left for college, he found me in the kitchen counting the last envelope of money for his books. He said, "Ma, I'll pay you back one day." I told him, "You'll pay me back by living right." He smiled and said, "Deal." I can still hear that promise echoing in my head, though life has collected interest on it in ways none of us planned. Sitting there now, years later, I realized I had spent decades building his wings and forgot I was supposed to have my own. I stared out the window at the street that had carried so many of our yesterdays. The maple tree had grown taller, its branches brushing the phone line. Somewhere a bell chimed, steady and familiar. It was the same sound that once told me Andre was home from school. Memory, I thought, is both blessing and burden. keeps you company, but it also keeps you from pretending. I pressed my hand flat against the album, closed it gently, and whispered to the quiet room, I remember enough to know what love costs. Then I reached for the coffee pot, poured another cup, and watched the steam rise like old prayers finding their way back to heaven. The first time I noticed the new shape of our life, it was a Sunday afternoon with sunlight sliding across their hardwood floor. Tiffany had invited a few friends from work for tea and small bites and asked me to come by early with a pan of mac and cheese since she said mine had the right kind of comfort without too much butter. I arrived with the dish wrapped in towels and a smile that knew its way around any kitchen. Tiffany opened the door with a gracious tilt of her head, and a scent of citrus followed her breeze through the hallway. Thank you, Ms. Johnson, she said without missing a beat. Your timing is perfect. She led me to the counter where place cards waited like little soldiers. Her handwriting was neat and thin. Names sat in their folded tints and the lids on the serving bowls matched the napkins which matched the flowers. It was beautiful in a way that did not leave much room for fingerprints. I reached for the refrigerator door to tuck my pitcher of sweet tea beside their sparkling water, and she placed a gentle palm on the handle. Let me set the drinks, she said, and her smile did not move. Andre came in from the garage carrying a box of plates and he kissed my cheek mid-stride. Hey ma, looks great in here. Tiffany needs everything just right. He meant to compliment her. I felt the old pride rise in me because presentation matters and excellence is a form of kindness. Still I stood there with my pitcher in my hands and nowhere to set it down. The island was crowded and I realized this was not my kitchen and I did not know the rules yet. We sat for tea at 3. Conversation skimmed pleasantly along the surface like swallows chasing a pond. Talk of schedules and travel points and favorite brunch places circled the table. When someone asked about family traditions, Tiffany said she was teaching Andre how to keep things simple. And I smiled because simple is a cousin of honest, and I have always liked both. On my way out I reached for the empty pan and Tiffany had already washed it and set it on a towel. She made a little sound when the water dripped on the floor and I wiped it fast as if the drop were a misstep in a quiet dance. The second time was Thanksgiving. I had polished the tray and baked 2 pies and sent a message that morning asking what time I should arrive to help set the table. The reply blinked on my screen like a caution light. We are doing a small couples-only table this year for a change. We will bring you a plate. My first thought was to laugh at the idea that I needed a partner to earn a chair where I watched my son learn to chew. Then I looked at the pies cooling on the rack and decided to turn the oven light off and my voice off with it. Later that day Andre called and said we will swing by for a slice. They did. They stood in my doorway with polite hunger, and I wrapped 2 generous pieces and pressed them into their hands and told them the secret is a little vinegar in the crust. Tiffany said thank you again in that tidy tone and I stood at the sink after the door closed and listened to the quiet settle like flour in a bowl. There were smaller moments that carried more weight than their size. Tiffany preferred to call me Ms. Johnson. She said it showed respect and I told myself that words can mean 2 things at once. Respect is what you say and it is also how you sit with someone when their coffee is going cold. She liked to text before every visit. Please text before you drop by, she wrote the first time in a message that included several smiling faces which did not change the center of the sentence. I typed back of course since courtesy keeps a house from creaking. After a month of arranging my afternoons around their availability, I noticed I had begun to keep my shoes by the door not for a sudden walk but because I did not like the echo of waiting. Sometimes Tiffany would ask for a family recipe then serve it at her table, and announce a lighter version she had perfected. People praised her skill and I clapped too because it cost me nothing to be generous. The only thing that stung was the way Andre looked for her nod before he looked for my smile. When they hosted a game night they asked guests to bring a dish and a story about it. I brought red beans and rice that my mother taught me on a rainy week when the roof leaked. I told the story and waited for the warmth that usually follows a truth that feeds you. Tiffany thanked me then asked if I could send the recipe by email, so she could enter it into her card file in a cleaner format. Andre squeezed my shoulder lightly as if to say do not take it wrong. I did not take it wrong. I took it and put it away with all the other little packages that arrive at your door when life is changing, and you do not want to scare it off by raising your voice. Andre was in the middle with good intentions stacked like books he never had time to read. He wanted peace. He wanted ease. He wanted me to accept a smaller chair without naming it. When we were alone he would say, "Ma, you know Tiffany likes things organized. It helps her feel safe." I would nod and say safety is a fine goal. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted her to feel at home. I wanted a table long enough for all of us. Yet there were days when I could not shake the feeling that the table had been measured with new math and my name was now a fraction. The night he changed his ringtone from my calls to a softer chime, and I noticed it by accident, I told myself not to be foolish. Then I watched him decline a call from me during a dinner and send a quick text that said at dinner we'll call later, and his face did not change the way it used to when he heard my voice. I remembered how he once ran down a hallway away from a meeting, just to tell me he had been promoted, and we laughed together across the phone like children. People grow, that is holy, but sometimes growth forgets its gardener. I tried to invite them over on a Saturday for brunch. Tiffany wrote back that weekends were for errands and recovery. She offered a weekday evening 2 weeks away. I circled the date in my calendar and cooked too much food because habits are love dressed in routine. They canceled that afternoon with a message about a work emergency. I packed leftovers into neat containers and delivered 2 to Ms. Lorraine across the street. She tasted 1 spoonful and looked at me over her glasses. Baby, she said, love without respect will starve you. I did not answer. I did not want to hand my son and his wife to anyone's judgment. I wanted to hand them back to kindness and watch kindness work. So I kept showing up with quiet gifts. A bag of collards from the market. A small plant for their porch. A cookbook with notes in the margins. Tiffany received everything with gratitude that never opened the door past the entry rug. She would say, "This is lovely." Then she would glance at the clock. The message was clear without being cruel. Time with me was a quarter hour between their real plans. The day I brought over a framed photo of Andre at 7 holding a trophy from the spelling bee I loved so much, Tiffany thanked me and set it on a shelf in the hallway where the light does not reach. 2 weeks later I did not see it at all. When I asked gently, she said she had stored it for safekeeping while they updated the decor. I nodded and told myself safekeeping is another word with 2 meanings. Through it all, Andre kept insisting that everything was fine. He hugged me and called me Ma, and reminded me to bring a sweater if the restaurant was cold. He did small kind things and skipped the one brave thing. He would not say out loud that my chair had been moved to the edge of his life. That is how conflict grows in a family like ours. Not with shouting. With careful words and schedules and doors you must knock on before you can cross the porch you built. I kept my voice low because I wanted to be the mother I promised myself I would be. I kept my hands busy because a task can hold what the heart cannot. I cleaned the same countertop twice before sitting down. I put the kettle on and turned it off and put it on again. I told myself that love can bend without breaking. I told myself that if I am patient, the room will make space. Then came the day that taught me patience and erasing are not the same lesson, and that was the day the door stayed closed even though my hands were warm with a bag of pecan pastries and my mouth was full of their names. After that Sunday the distance did not arrive with a crash. It arrived like mist, thin at first and then everywhere. Plans began to live in pencil. A lunch would be set for Wednesday, then moved to Friday, then skipped because a meeting ran long. A movie night would be promised and then replaced by a text with a picture of takeout and a caption that said next time. I told myself next time is a kind of hope, but hope needs a body to live in. I could feel mine growing tired of holding an empty coat. The calendar on my wall looked the same as always, neat squares waiting for ink. But my days filled with erasures. I learned the new rhythm. Text first, wait, accept. Ask how next week looks, wait, accept. Offer Sunday dinner. Receive a polite maybe that stretched across 2 weeks and then thinned to nothing. I kept making small foods because I do not know how to love without the work of my hands. I made sweet tea and poured it into a jar for their porch, then watched it sit in my refrigerator because the day changed shape. I baked peach cobbler for a cookout that was moved to a restaurant where reservations were tight, and the dress code did not mention mothers. I drove home with the cobbler beside me and laughed once in the car so I would not cry. When I scrolled through my phone I saw photos like postcards from a city I used to live in. Brunch with family said one caption. A table full of plates and smiles, a glow of morning light, my son with his arm around Tiffany while her parents leaned in. I looked for my face the way you look for a landmark when you are trying not to get lost. I was not there. I told myself not to read captions as verdicts. Then another picture arrived the next week. A backyard evening with a string of lights and paper lanterns. The note said summer family night. I measured the word family against the quiet of my kitchen, and understood it means different things depending on who is holding the pen. My birthday came. Andre sent a bouquet delivered by a man who said my name without looking up from his list. Tiffany texted a photo of a candle with a heart and the words "We love you." I stood at the sink with the flowers in my hand and thought about all the birthdays where we blew out candles in the same room and laughed when the smoke curled back like it wanted another wish. I set the bouquet in water and told myself love by delivery still counts, but a vase cannot pass you a slice of cake. Ms. Lorraine watched me carry the trash to the curb that afternoon and said, "Your shoulders sitting higher than your smile. Come sit on my porch for a minute." I did. She poured lemonade and let the silence do the first talking. Then she said gently, "Some people think respect is a rule you make for other folks. Some of us learned it is a promise you make about yourself." Her words found a place to rest in me. The next week I invited Andre to ride with me to the farmer market the way we used to. He said he could not get away. Then he sent me a link to an online grocery service. "Thank you, baby," I wrote, and I ordered collars that tasted like they had never seen a field. I tried again in small ways. I asked Tiffany if she wanted to learn my cornbread method. She replied that she had a clean recipe she preferred. I texted a photo of an old quilt I was mending and asked if their guest room needed a throw. She used a smiling face and wrote, "We are going for a different look." I walked through my days like a careful guest in my own life. I moved softly around my hopes so they would not startle. The worst moments were not the cancellations. They were the polite edits to our language. Tiffany said she liked things simple. I said I liked them honest. She said immediate family when she meant the list inside her head. I said I will be here if you need me, and heard how those words left me standing by a door that opened from the other side. Even church felt different for a while. I sat in the pew and sang the same hymns I have always sung, but I watched couples share a program down the row and felt the old ache of widowhood and the new ache of being a mother who must ask for a chair. Pastor Green preached about Jonah that Sunday, and how you cannot outrun what you are called to be. I wrote in the margin of my bulletin, "Be called to peace, not permission." The week after that, I offered to drive Tiffany to an appointment when her car needed service. She thanked me and said she had a ride with a friend from work. I told myself it was good that she had a circle. Then I stood in my kitchen and watched a pot of beans simmer, and wondered when my circle had become a line. Later there was another text about a small gathering. Couples game night. I did not ask to come. I do not play to be tolerated. I made a pan of brownies and took half to the church office, then tucked the rest in my freezer for a day. I might feel like celebrating myself. That evening I opened my old photo album again, and a parking receipt fell out from years ago, when Andre called me from the emergency clinic after a basketball sprain. He had said, "Can you come?" and I had gotten there before the doctor. I held the receipt and smiled at how fast my feet used to move when my name was welcome. The next morning a package arrived on my porch. It was a small basket with lemons and a note in Tiffany handwriting that said, "Thinking of you. Hope this brightens your kitchen." I set the lemons in a bowl and thanked her by text. Then I looked at the bowl and felt something quiet snap. It was not anger. It was the line between patience and permission. A lemon is bright, but it is also sour. You must add sugar and water and work to make it a drink that people ask for. I realized I had been bringing sugar and water to a door that would not open, hoping the recipe would be enough. That afternoon the group thread changed titles again. Family dinner became game night schedule. I watched my name slide down the screen as old messages moved out of sight. I did not reply. I put on my shoes and walked to the end of the block and back while the sun leaned down. When I returned, the kitchen smelled like clean counters and a decision I could not yet name. The next day I baked pecan pastries and placed them in a warm bag. Because habit will practice itself even when the song has ended. I told myself I would stop by and leave them on the porch with a note. Then I remembered the message that said, "Please text before you drop by." I texted and said I had a small treat for them. The reply was quick. "Today is not a good day. We are resting. Thank you though." Resting echoed in my ears while the pastries cooled. I wrapped them anyway because love does not need reason to complete its sentence. I carried the bag to my car, drove across town, and parked at the curb. I would not knock. I would set them down and walk away. Felt like a fair compromise. When I reached the porch, the curtain moved and the door opened 2 inches. Tiffany stood there with a careful smile and a voice as soft as a blanket. "Today is really not a good day. Please do not come unannounced." Her eyes were not unkind, her tone was not sharp, but the air between us was a wall. Behind her I saw Andre in the hallway. He did not move forward. He did not call my name. The bag of pastries warmed my hands like a small animal that needed shelter. I said all right and stepped back. The door closed with a gentle sound. The porch mat said welcome. I read it twice and tasted the quiet. I stood on the porch with the warm bag of pecan pastries soft in my hands and the word resting still hanging in the air. The door had opened just enough for Tiffany to place her smile between us, and then it had closed with a quiet that could have been kindness if it had not been final. The mat under my feet said welcome in a cheerful script that felt like a joke told in a language I no longer spoke. Through the glass I saw a slice of hallway and the dim shape of Andre, but he did not move toward me and he did not call my name. I told myself I would not make a scene. I told myself I would leave the pastries on the step and let sweetness do a job that words had failed at. I set the bag near the doorbell and walked back to the edge of the porch where the geraniums sat like polite witnesses. Laughter rose from the backyard, sudden and round, the sound of people who are sure they belong. I hesitated and then followed the sidewalk along the side fence, not to spy, only to turn toward my car. Halfway down the walk the wind lifted the curtain and gave me a small window into their evening. Strings of lights glowed above a table set with lemon water and blue plates. Tiffany's mother reached to straighten a napkin and her father held a carving knife like a baton for a familiar song. Andre lifted a bowl and smiled at someone out of sight. My feet stopped without asking me. I wanted to clap for them, for the way a family looks when it fits together. I wanted to be happy from the far side of the fence. I wanted to be better than my ache. A neighbor carrying a little dog waved at me and said pretty party. I nodded and made my face into good manners. The church bell across town rang a low note that rolled under the moment and kept going. I turned back to the porch and the word welcome looked brighter now that I knew where I stood. I took a breath and told myself leave the food and leave the moment. When I reached the step again the door opened 2 inches and a hand slipped out to take the bag. Thank you so much, came Tiffany's voice through the narrow space. We will enjoy these. I said you are welcome and the door closed, more gently than before, but the gentleness did not soften the edge. I walked to my car while the sky pulled a thin veil of gold across the roofs. My hands shook on the wheel so I kept them still in my lap until the trembling passed. I drove home slow like a person learning a new street. At a red light my phone chimed. I did not check it. When I unlocked my front door the house smelled like clean counters and soap that had done its work and gone quiet. I poured water into the kettle and watched the blue flame hold steady. When the tea was ready I carried the cup to the table, opened my phone and saw a new post at the top of my feed. The picture bloomed across the screen before I could look away. Lemon water catching the light. Blue plates. The same string of bulbs. Andre on one side. Tiffany between her parents on the other. The caption said our special evening, family complete. The words were simple and heavy. They sat down on my chest and refused to move. I studied the photo the way you study a test you did not know you would take. In the comments people said so happy for you and nothing beats family and parents are everything. I scrolled like a person lost in a mirror maze, looking for a corner where I could breathe. There was no mention of the warm bag of pastries or the mother at the porch or the voice that had been told to rest elsewhere. I touched the screen and it wobbled with my hand. I set the phone down very gently as if it were a sleeping child I did not want to wake. I walked to the sink and let the water run until it turned truly cold and then I splashed my face. The shock steadied me. I remembered a younger version of myself teaching Andre to ride a bike, the way I ran behind him holding the seat until his balance caught and then I let go. I had thought that letting go was a gift that would send him forward and leave me cheering. I had not imagined it would leave me standing in the street while someone else measured who counted as immediate. The bell rang again somewhere beyond my window and I counted 3 beats before the sound faded. I returned to the table and picked up my phone because the part of me that still believed in mercy wanted to check for a private message that would soften the bruise. There was one. Thank you for the pastries. Tonight is private. We hope you understand. I stared at the sentence and felt the way a picture frame feels when the nail slips and the glass meets the floor. I did not write back. I did not beg with words I could never be proud of in the morning. I turned the phone face down and pressed my palm against the wood of the table to remind myself that texture exists, that something can hold. In the quiet I heard my own breath and the faint hum of the refrigerator and the far-off traffic that does not care about anyone's sorrow. I thought about the word family and how it has always been a door and a table for me, not a password. I thought about the hours I have spent making food and space and calm for the people I love. I thought about the way Tiffany had said please do not come unannounced, and how the porch mat had said welcome, and how sometimes the truth lives in the gap between signs. The tea had gone cool. I drank it anyway because some things are worth finishing even when the warmth is gone. Then a sentence rose in me crisp and whole, as if it had been waiting at the back of the line for its turn to introduce itself. I realized the invitation to be mother expired without notice. That night I sat at the table and let the dark come in without turning on a lamp. The phone lay face down beside my mug, a black square that held more silence than any room could carry. I thought I would cry right away, the way thunder follows lightning, but the tears waited as if they wanted me to hear something first. The refrigerator hummed. The clock clicked. A car passed on the street with music low enough to sound like water. I lifted the mug and found the tea cold. I drank it anyway and tasted nothing. My chest ached in a way that was not pain and not fear, a weight set carefully in the center like someone arranging a room for a guest who will not leave. Shame arrived first, polite and thorough. I told myself I should have known better than to bring pastries uninvited. I told myself a mother my age ought to understand new rules and learn how to live inside them. I replayed the moment on the porch and revised my lines like an actress after the show is over. I should have said thank you and walked away. I should have smiled wider. I should have been thinner or gentler or quieter or younger. The ugly little list marched by and I let it, because some nights you must watch the wrong words tire themselves out. Then the anger came, bright and quick, and I stood up to walk it off. I wiped the counter twice. I ran water into a clean pot, then poured it out. I opened the back door and breathed the night air and waited for the heat to leave my face. Anger is a spark that likes to pretend it is a lantern. It lights everything too fast and calls the shadows names they do not deserve. I did not want to become a woman who burned her own kitchen to make a point no one heard. I sat down again and folded my hands and asked the quiet to try again with gentler words. That is when the sadness came. It did not crash. It unfolded soft and steady, like a blanket pulled over me from the feet up. I rested my forehead on the cool table and saw scenes from years stacked like plates. The car rides to the clinic when Andre was small and wheezing the way I sang to keep his breath even. The afternoons when he sprawled on the floor with math problems and I told him he was smarter than his fear. The first time he fixed something in the house without asking and grinned at me like a little boy who had borrowed the grown man he would become. I felt a sob rise and I swallowed it. Then another rose and I let it through. Tears slid without noise. When I reached for a tissue my hands shook and I pressed my palms flat to the table to make them remember they belong to a woman who has survived worse weather than this. I thought about calling someone. Ms. Lorraine would say come sit on my couch, baby, and she would not ask for the whole story until I was ready. Pastor Green would pray and the prayer would be a soft chair. But the hour had tucked itself deep and I did not want to make my pain into a midnight trumpet. I let the tears take turns with the breathing. I told the Lord what I could not tell anyone else. I told him I was not asking for victory. I was asking for a way to live quietly inside the truth. The truth, when I looked at it square, was plain. I was not welcome in a room where my heart had set the first table. I was not a person to hate or to hurt. I was a person to manage. I was a person to thank from a safe distance. I sat with that sentence until it settled into a shape I could touch without flinching. Outside a dog barked once and then gave up. The night admitted a thin seam of silver above the blinds, the first hint of morning. I carried my mug to the sink and washed it slow. The warm water felt like the first kind thing I had been handed all day. I dried the cup and put it in its place. Order has always been my small prayer. I moved through the rooms and straightened what did not need straightening. I folded a throw that was already neat. I turned a picture frame 2 degrees so the light would catch it in the morning. On the dresser a small box held old letters and receipts and the crooked heart Andre had cut from red paper in 2nd grade. I lifted the paper heart and held it to my chest and spoke to the girl inside me who had once believed that love could fix everything if you just kept cooking and saying yes. It cannot fix what will not sit at the table. It cannot fix what calls you later and means never. I slid the heart back into the box and closed the lid. I went to the bathroom and washed my face and watched the woman in the mirror breathe. Her eyes were tired but not empty. Her mouth was firm but not mean. This is what loss looks like when it remembers its manners. Back at the table I opened my notebook and wrote a line without thinking. Do not mistake patience for permission. I underlined it once and leaned back. The kettle clicked. I did not make more tea. I did not want to hold anything warm I could not taste. I wanted air. I opened the front door and stood on the porch and listened to the neighborhood invent its morning. A few birds tried a tune and then changed their minds. Somewhere far away a siren rose and fell. The streetlights blinked out one by one as if they had agreed in advance. I imagined the inside of Andre's house, the quiet after laughter, the plates stacked in the dishwasher, the slice of lemon drying on the counter. I tried to bless that quiet without including myself in it. I asked the Lord to keep them safe the way I always do. I asked for nothing else. When the first clean stripe of daylight touched the porch railing, I understood that I had reached the bottom of whatever this was. There was no more to dig. I could not argue myself into a chair. I could not bake myself into a place setting. I could not text myself into a calendar. I was standing in the truth that had been circling me for months and finally put its hand on my shoulder. It did not feel like punishment. Felt like instruction. The instruction was simple and heavy. The instruction said stop asking for a key to a door that no longer fits your hand. I stepped back inside and closed the door, and the latch sounded like a sentence that made sense. I whispered one more thing so I would remember it in the day when the noise returned. Dignity is not loud. It packs quietly. Morning came like a visitor I did not expect but was glad to see. The light that slipped through the blinds was pale and honest, the kind that does not flatter or hide. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and stood at the window while it filled the room with warmth. The night before had left my eyes swollen but my heart strangely clear. It felt as if someone had finally swept the dust off a mirror, and I could see the edges of myself again. I moved slower than usual, but each step felt deliberate. My house was small and quiet, but it was mine. Every dish on the shelf had a story. Every picture on the wall had survived a season. For the first time in months, I noticed how still the air was when no one expected anything from me. I sat at the table with a pen and paper, the kind of tools that ask for truth. I wrote a list, not of grievances but of directions. I needed to know what living with dignity looked like when the applause stopped. First line, take stock. I pulled the folder from the drawer where I kept my bills and savings records. Years of careful work lived inside those pages: retirement funds, insurance, the deed to the house my husband and I had paid off one overtime shift at a time. It was more than enough for one woman who had learned to stretch every blessing. Second line, simplify. The house felt too large now, full of echoes and stairs that talked back to my knees. I wanted walls that did not hold memories like hostages. I circled a small ad I'd seen for independent living near the church. The brochure had shown wide hallways and sunlight on clean floors, a porch for morning coffee, and a line dancing class on Thursdays. I smiled at that. Third line, give back. I thought of the single mothers I'd served meals to at the shelter. Maybe my savings could carry someone else for a while. I wrote in neat letters. Set aside donation for women starting over. Fourth line, update will. I remembered Mr. Carter, the lawyer from church who had helped me settle my husband's estate. He had told me years ago, keep your papers current because peace loves preparation. I added his name to the list. Fifth line, boundaries. The word looked strong sitting alone on the page. I whispered it out loud like a prayer. Boundaries mean I can love you without losing me. They mean I answer the phone when my heart says yes, not when guilt taps its watch. I decided I would no longer show up where I was not wanted and no longer explain why I stayed away. I would not chase updates about events I did not plan or invitations that never arrived. My peace would not wait on a ringtone. I folded the paper and tucked it into my Bible between Psalms and Proverbs, two neighborhoods that understand survival. Then I got dressed and drove to the park near Decatur Square. The sun had lifted itself higher by then, bright but kind, and the benches were filled with people walking small dogs or talking to the air. I found a seat near the fountain and breathed. I thought about what Ms. Lorraine had said, love without respect will starve you, and I realized I had been feeding everyone but myself. The truth did not taste bitter this time. It tasted earned. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo of Andre's family dinner, and looked at it one last time without flinching. They looked happy, and happiness should not be punished. I whispered, Lord, keep them safe. Then I deleted the picture. I did not delete the people, only the proof that used to bruise. Back home, I opened the windows and let the wind move through. The curtains lifted and the room smelled like a beginning. I made a sandwich, ate it slowly, and laughed when I realized it was the first meal I had finished without checking my phone in months. When the mail came, I sorted it with new eyes. Bills in one pile, catalogs in another, junk in the trash. One envelope was from Legacy at Peachtree, the independent living place I had circled. I had asked for information weeks ago and forgotten. Inside was a letter about an open house next weekend. The words seemed to glow. Join us for coffee, tours, and conversation. I pressed the paper to my chest and smiled. My life was sending me its own invitation. That evening I sat on the porch and watched the streetlights blink on. Children rode bikes in the fading light. Their laughter the same sound Andre once made when I pushed him forward. I realized I was not the same woman who had waited by the phone. I was the woman who had learned to stop knocking on doors that opened inward only. I was the woman who could start over without apology. I picked up my notebook again and wrote one more line beneath the others. Build a place that welcomes you. I underlined it twice and whispered, if I wasn't welcome there, I will build a place that welcomes me. The sentence felt like a key turning in a new lock. The kettle whistled in the kitchen. I poured the water, watched the steam rise, and thought, maybe this is what healing sounds like. A soft whistle calling you back to yourself. The next morning I called the bank and asked to meet with Ms. Patel. Her receptionist offered me a slot after lunch and I said I would be there with a notebook and my good pen. I wore a simple blue dress and flats that could carry me through a day of new decisions without complaining. The bank lobby smelled like clean carpet and fresh paper. Ms. Patel greeted me with a steady smile that reached her eyes. She invited me to sit and asked how she could help. I told her I wanted to understand my money, the way a carpenter understands wood. I wanted to know what would bend and what would break and how to build a life that would hold. She nodded like a person who enjoys plain talk. We reviewed my accounts one by one. Savings that I had fed like a small plant. Retirement that I had watered even when bills were loud. A little emergency fund I had kept near the front of the drawer. She spoke in clear sentences and circled numbers with a calm hand. You have done careful work, she said. You can choose stability and still keep room for joy. We made a plan for monthly income that did not touch the heart of the savings. We set up automatic transfers so bills would not get to boss me around. We opened a small account labeled Giving so I could carry out the promise I wrote to myself about helping women who were starting over. When we finished, she slid a neat folder across the desk and said, "Peace likes order." I thanked her and felt taller without moving a muscle. On the way out, I passed the teller line and remembered all the years I stood there hoping the math would be kind. Today the math bowed to me. That afternoon I called Mr. Carter. He answered with the slow voice of a man who reads every word twice. I told him I needed to update my will and put things in writing for a future that I could respect. He offered an appointment the next morning. I brought a stack of papers tied with a ribbon because I like my life to look tidy, even when it has been shaken. His office had books in tall cases and a window that framed a live oak. He asked gentle questions about my wishes and listened like a pastor. I told him I wanted a simple division. A portion for Andre because blood is a covenant. A portion for a fund that supports single mothers who need a push across a hard month. And one condition for the part that waits for my son. Not punishment. Reflection. I want him to write a letter to you, I said. Not to justify. Not to apologize. To explain to you in honest words how he understands the way our family changed and what he plans to practice if he ever has to sit in my chair. Mr. Carter nodded and wrote without hurry. He said that is a wise condition. It invites growth without asking you to carry it. We signed what needed signing. He made copies and placed them in a folder with brass corners. I left that office lighter than I had entered, as if paperwork could be a kind of prayer that angels know how to file. On my porch, Ms. Lorraine waved me over and asked how it went. I said I have a map now. She smiled and said maps are good for hearts that have walked in circles. 2 days later I dressed in a soft sweater and walked into Legacy at Peachtree for their open house. The lobby was bright and smelled like lemon and books. A young woman named Hannah handed me a name tag and a brochure and said the coffee was fresh. I walked slow, the way you do when you are trying to learn a new song. The tour moved past a dining room where 2 ladies folded napkins while talking about grandbabies. We saw an exercise room with light weights and a bulletin board filled with flyers. Line dancing on Thursdays. Knitting on Wednesdays. A gospel sing-along once a month. In a sunroom 3 men argued gently about baseball. We reached an apartment with a small balcony that looked out at a garden where someone had planted marigolds in a tidy row. The kitchen had room for my 2 favorite pots. The living room was modest and bright. The bedroom had a window that would drink the morning. Hannah stood back and let me stand in the quiet. I closed my eyes and heard myself exhale. I could imagine the kettle on the stove and the smell of coffee. I could imagine placing a small rug by the sink and a plant by the window and a poem on the wall. I could imagine sleeping through the night. I asked about costs and waited for my stomach to clench. It did not. The plan that Ms. Patel and I had made would hold this new roof without panic. I placed my hand on the balcony door and felt the simple thrill of a handle that belonged to me, and to no one else. I told Hannah I wanted to begin the application. She brought me forms and I filled them with a calm I had not met in years. On the way out I passed a table where 2 women were practicing steps to a slow song. One looked up and said, "We have room if you do." I laughed and said, "Give me a week and a pair of shoes that remember how to turn." Back home I stood in the doorway of my old house and saw it with new eyes. The rooms had been faithful. They had kept our secrets and our birthdays. They had warmed bread and cooled tears. It was time to bless them and pass them on. I called a realtor that a friend at church had used. She arrived with a tablet and a measuring tape and the kindness of someone who has moved her own mother. We walked from room to room. She talked about light and paint and the way buyers like to see their future. I told her I wanted a fair price and a clean timeline. We agreed on a plan and a photographer came the next day. Before he arrived I packed away the personal pictures and left one framed print of a tree against a plain wall. I kept the quilt that my mother had stitched and folded it like a flag. I kept a shoebox of letters and the 2nd grade paper heart. The rest I sorted into piles. Keep, give, sell. The give pile grew faster than the others. Felt right. I called the church office and asked if the shelter could use a set of dishes and a small table. They could. 2 young men came with a truck and thanked me like I had given them more than wood and plates. That evening I walked each room and laid my hand on a wall the way you greet an old friend. Thank you for being our first winter. Thank you for the birthdays we carried. Thank you for the mornings that did not break me. The offer came 3 days after the listing went live. It was clean and close to my number. I signed and watched my name move across the screen with the steadiness of a tide that knows the shore. While the sale moved through its steps I began to pack the last of my things. I wrote labels in neat letters and stacked boxes where the light would not fade them. Ms. Lorraine stopped by with soup in a mason jar, and a short speech about how beginnings sometimes were the clothes of endings. We sat on the porch and ate in companionable silence. The next morning I took my folder back to the bank to finalize the new automatic payments, and to set a date to close one account and open another with my new address. The teller asked if I needed help carrying anything and I said, "No baby, I have been carrying heavy things a long time." She smiled and said, "Then this part will be easy." I scheduled the movers, a small team recommended by a choir sister. On moving day I woke before dawn. I brewed coffee and stood in the living room while boxes waited like soldiers who understood their orders. The movers were careful and quick. They wrapped the mirror and the table and my 2 favorite pots. I kept the small bag with my Bible, the notebook, and a photo of Andre at 7. When the last box was on the truck I walked through the rooms one more time. In the kitchen I pressed my palm to the counter and felt the echo of every meal. In the doorway I turned the lock and put the keys in an envelope for the realtor. I did not cry. I thanked the house and stepped into the morning. At Legacy the staff met me with a welcome that did not need a mat. They showed me where to sign and gave me a small basket with a map and a list of this week's activities. The apartment smelled like new paint and possibility. The mover set my chair by the window and my table near the kitchen and I placed the quilt across the bed. I plugged in the lamp and watched the room soften. I brewed coffee on my new stove and carried the cup to the balcony. The garden below hummed with bees and a woman in a red sweater waved from the path. I waved back and felt the corner of my mouth learn a new smile. Over the next days I put my world in order. I stacked books on the shelf by size and comfort. I hung the poem in the hall where I could read a line on my way to brush my teeth. I put the pan I use for greens on the front burner and the kettle on the back. I placed a small plant on the windowsill and promised not to neglect it. I walked the halls and learned faces and names. Mr. Alexander builds small stools for neighbors and leaves them outside their doors. Ms. Delaner teaches a gentle stretch class and makes everyone feel like an athlete. The first Wednesday I brought my yarn to the knitting circle and sat next to a woman with a laugh that sounded like a tambourine. We traded stories while our hands worked. At first I told the short version of my move. Downsizing. Looking for quiet. Wanting to be closer to church. That was all true. I did not need to add the porch or the door or the word that cut. On Thursday I tried the line dancing class. My feet remembered more than I expected. I missed a step and laughed with the others, and no one looked like I had broken a rule. Later I met the chaplain in the small chapel off the lobby. We talked about music and favorite verses. He asked if I needed anything and I said just a place to sit still sometimes. He said that was the easiest request he would get all week. I visited the church on Sunday and sat closer to the front than I usually do. Pastor Green looked out and spotted me and smiled in a way that blessed without making a show. The sermon was about the difference between peace and quiet. Quiet can be bought with silence. Peace must be built with truth. I wrote that down. When I got back to my apartment I found a note on my door. Welcome neighbor. Thursday tea on the patio at 4. Bring your favorite cup if you like. I brought the cup Andre gave me for Mother's Day many years ago, and I set it on the table like a small flag from a country I still love. I listened to women tell stories about grandchildren, and broken bones that healed and gardens that refused to die. I laughed in the right places and in a few wrong ones. Later that night I slept a deep sleep without checking my phone once. In the middle of all this, the past still rang from time to time. Andre called 2 days after I moved. He asked how the new place was and I told him it was bright and kind. He said he wanted to come by and I said visits are welcome by appointment because I have activities now. He paused and then said he would text to set a time. I thanked him and meant it. After the call I sat on the balcony and felt the strange weight of a new boundary that stood without needing my hands to hold it up. The sale of the house closed the following week. Ms. Patel called to confirm the deposit and we shifted the plan so the money could serve me gently for a long time. I made my first gift to the fund for single mothers and I wrote a note that said from a woman who remembers. In the afternoons I walked the garden path and learned the rhythm of bees. I read in the sunroom where the light is good and the chairs forgive your posture. I joined a small group that cooks once a month for families at the shelter, and taught a younger volunteer how to cut collards without bruising them. I bought a second set of towels and a brighter doormat because welcome looks good on my floor. One evening I stood at my stove and stirred a pot of beans while a quiet song played on the radio. I felt the kind of contentment that does not need an audience. It surprised me and then it did not. I had taken the steps. I had signed the papers. I had moved my chair into a room that knew my name without asking me to spell it. When the kettle whistled I lifted it and thought this is what action looks like in a season like mine. Not shouting. Not slamming. Not leaving a trail of words you have to gather in the morning. Action is a folder with tabs. It is a signature. It is a set of keys on a new ring. It is a woman on a balcony with coffee and a plan. The first week in my new place had the gentle rhythm of a song I almost remembered. On Sunday afternoon Hannah at the front desk called to say I had visitors. I walked to the lounge and saw Andre and Tiffany sitting together on a charcoal sofa under a painting of magnolias. Andre stood quickly and hugged me with that careful strength sons use when they are trying to fix the air. Ma, he said, why did you not tell me you moved? I sat across from them and folded my hands. You have been busy deciding what family means, I said. I decided to stop waiting in the hallway. Tiffany smoothed the hem of her jacket and looked around the room as if the soft lamps might offer instructions. We were shocked, she said. We just wanted boundaries. I nodded because that word had followed me like a shadow. Boundaries go both ways, I said. She looked at Andre and he looked at me like a man at a crossroads who has a map but does not like the road he must take. He said, Ma, you could have told me. We could have helped with the move. I studied his face and heard the old tenderness inside the new distance. You could have, but you did not ask where I was standing, I said. You asked me to wait for later, and later is a kind of attic where you put things you want to forget without throwing them away. He winced and then tried a different door. Is it safe here? Do you have everything you need? I smiled because concern is a kind of love even when it arrives late. It is safe. I have coffee and a balcony and a chair that forgives me when I sit too long. He laughed once and then his eyes watered. He gestured at the room. It is nice, he said, and the two words were crowded with what he did not know how to say. Tiffany leaned forward. We never meant to hurt you. We just need our own space sometimes. Couples need privacy. Schedules are tight. Emotions get messy. I held her gaze. Privacy is a door you close to rest. Exclusion is a door you close to erase. She opened her mouth and then closed it. Andre rubbed his hands together like he was washing them and there was no sink. He said, "Ma, we thought you understood." I said I understood more than you realized. I understood when my calls turned into texts and my visits turned into requests. I understood when family dinner became a picture I had to like from another room. His shoulders sagged. "I do not want you to feel pushed out," he said. "I want peace." I said peace can include truth. The truth is I love you enough to stop asking for a chair where my name is not on the place card. Tiffany sat up straighter. "We can make more room," she said. "We can plan better. We can include you in the calendar." I took a breath and let her see that I was not angry. Plans are kind. Calendars are helpful. Respect is the table the calendar sits on. She blinked like the light shifted. Andre said softly, "What do you want from us?" The question felt like a bridge. "I want what I taught you," I said. Honor. Plain speech. A knock before you change the locks. If you want me at your table, invite me with the same warmth you offer guests. If you do not want me there, say it plainly so I can build a day that does not wait on your maybe. I will not hold you hostage to my feelings, and I will not let your schedule hold mine. He nodded like each word took a seat beside him. Tiffany tried again. "We thought you liked things simple." I smiled. "I like them honest." She swallowed. Then she said, "We did not mean to call you not family." I looked at Andre and then at her. "You did not have to say it. You wrote it on evenings and on plans I found out about after the plates were washed." Andre put his face in his hands for a moment and then looked up. He said, "I am sorry, Ma," and the words landed with the weight of a man, not a boy. I let the apology sit where it belonged. "Thank you," I said. He reached for my hand and I let him hold it. Then I pulled it back and folded it in my lap, because I needed my hands to belong to me while we finished. Tiffany cleared her throat. "What about holidays? We can host you. We can rotate. We can talk about expectations. We can make a list." I said a list is a good start. Here is mine. No surprises that move my name. No silence that lasts longer than a season. If you need space, say you need space and give it an end date so space does not become exile. If you make a rule for me, make it for your side too. If I must text before I come, then you must text before you cancel. She opened her notebook as if to write. Andre looked at the window and back at me. He said, "You sound different." I said, "I am different." The door you closed made room for the person I forgot I was. The room went quiet. In that quiet, the fountain in the courtyard whispered and a cart rolled past in the hall. Tiffany said in a small voice, "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. Hate is heavy and I have carried enough. I want you to treat me like a person, not a tradition. I want you to see that a mother is not a background. She is a full story who learned to shorten her sentences for the sake of dinner. Andre covered his mouth and then said I should have done better. I said, "You can do better now." He nodded. Then he said, "Can we come by next Sunday and bring groceries and cook here and learn your way with greens?" I thought about my new calendar. I thought about the tea on the patio and the knitting circle and the nap I owed myself. "Next Sunday at 4, I said. "Bring onions. Bring patience. Bring the truth." He smiled the smile that used to show up at my porch after school. Tiffany said, "I will bring a clean recipe card." I said, "This time write it the way I say it." The room relaxed. Then I sat up a little because the most important sentence still waited at the door. "I need you both to hear this," I said. "Decisions have consequences. I do not aim to punish. I aim to live with the results we all created." I moved. I changed my will. I gave a portion of my heart and my savings to women who are starting over. He blinked. "You changed your will." "Yes, baby. A portion remains for you. But there is a condition. When that time comes, you will write a letter to my lawyer. Not to apologize. To tell the truth about what you learned about love and respect and boundaries, and the cost of not naming things on time." He sat back and nodded like a man agreeing to a hard job he should have taken sooner. Tiffany whispered, "That sounds fair." I stood because my body knew the conversation had reached its last mile. I said, "I am not closing my door. I am closing the window that let in drafts. If you come through the door, I will meet you with a chair and a plate. If you stand on the porch, I will wave and go back to my soup. Both choices are allowed. Both are love." Andre rose and put his arms around me, and this time I let the hug last. He said, "I love you, Ma," with a voice that remembered me. I said, "I love you too, and I love me too, and that is new." Tiffany stood and asked, "May I hug you?" I said yes. Her embrace was careful and human. She stepped back with wet eyes and said, "We will try." I said, "Try is a seed. Water it." We walked to the door together. At the threshold, Andre turned and looked at my small living room. He said, "This looks like peace." I said, "Peace arrived not when you changed but when I did." He nodded once, the way a man nods when he believes a sentence he cannot improve. They left with softer steps than the ones they came in on. I stood in the quiet lounge and felt the air settle around me like a well-made bed. Then I went back to my apartment and put the kettle on. Boundaries can be steeped like tea. Give them time and they bloom. A week slipped by like a smooth river, and I learned the corners of my new life the way a hand learns a favorite cup. Mornings began with quiet light on the balcony and the kettle answering the sun. Afternoons found me in the garden path counting bees. Evenings rested in a chair that forgave my shoulders. I kept the small promises I wrote to myself. I walked to knitting on Wednesdays and let my hands remember patience. I stepped with the line dancers on Thursdays and laughed when my feet corrected themselves. I sang low in the small chapel when the door was open and let the hymns rinse the last taste of pleading from my tongue. The phone no longer sat like an altar at the edge of the table. It was a tool again. I answered when my heart said yes. I let it ring when my peace was brewing. On Sunday at 4, right on time, Andre texted at the gate and Tiffany added a please and a thank you that felt like care rather than ceremony. They brought onions and a small sack of patience like I had asked. I set them at my stove and told them to wash their hands in their hurry. We cooked in a slow circle. I showed Andre how to listen for the right sizzle, and when to move the heat lower so the greens would soften without losing themselves. Tiffany held the recipe card and wrote in her neat script exactly what I said. A little vinegar. A little sugar to sing back. Taste and tell the truth. She asked questions that sounded like respect. Andre chopped with a rhythm that had a boy inside it. We ate at my small table with the balcony door open to the garden air. They told me about work and about a class Tiffany wanted to take and about a neighbor who owned a piano that needed a new home. I told them about Ms. Delaney's stretch class and about Mr. Alexander's stools and about the way morning bells sound different when you are not waiting for an answer. No one raised a voice. No one measured the room with a ruler. When they stood to leave, Andre washed the plates and Tiffany dried them and put them where I could find them. Before he went out the door, Andre turned back and said, "This was good, Ma," and he meant the food and the hour and the new way we had set our chairs. I slept all the way through that night and woke to the plain miracle of not bracing for anything. The next days moved with a humble shine. A letter came from the shelter with a photo of a mother and a small boy standing in front of a table set with plates that looked like mine. The note said, "Thank you for making room." I set it on my bookshelf beside a framed verse that has watched me stand up more than once. Mr. Carter called to say the papers were filed and in order. He said peace loves preparation, and I told him he was right. Ms. Patel sent a neat email that showed the giving account had made its first quiet difference. In the garden I met a woman who had lost her husband 2 years ago. We traded recipes and the kind of silence that feels like company. Some afternoons I sat on the balcony with coffee and watched the wind red the marigolds. Other afternoons I visited the church kitchen and taught 2 volunteers how to cut collards without bruising them. A month framed itself like a steady picture. Boundaries held the corners without needing tape. Andre and I spoke once or twice a week. Sometimes he called to tell me something small and good. Sometimes he called to say he did not have the right words yet. I told him that honesty is already a word. Tiffany sent a photo of the recipe card stained with one small dot of pot liquor and wrote, "I followed every word." It tasted like home. I thanked her and did not add a sermon. On a warm Saturday they hosted lunch and invited me with a clear time and a clear ending and a note that said, "There will be space for you at the table." When I arrived, the photo of Andre at 7 had found a place in the light. We ate and laughed in the gentle register families use when they are learning each other again. I left on schedule with a hug at the door and my name intact. Some invitations I declined. I did it the way Pastor Green taught us, quick and kind. "Thank you for thinking of me." Another time, I did not explain. I did not apologize. I made soup and let it rest and shared a portion with a neighbor who had a tired look in her eyes. On a quiet evening I sat with Ms. Lorraine on her porch and told her the shape of the month. She listened and then nodded. She said, "Baby, the difference between quiet and peace is this. Quiet asks you not to speak. Peace helps you say the right thing at the right time and leave the rest to tomorrow." I walked home under a sky that had room for every star, and felt the sentence settle into place. In my apartment, I set the kettle on and opened the window to the comfortable night. The calendar on the wall no longer looked like a test. It looked like a quilt of ordinary days sewn with strong thread. I was not waiting for permission to be welcome. I was practicing a life that welcomed me as I am. When the whistle rose, I poured the water and watched the steam lift like a prayer that did not ask for anything. I thought about doors and tables and clocks and how each one had learned my name again. I thought about the woman I used to be, how she stood politely on porches with warm bags and brave silence. I thanked her for carrying us this far. I told her I would take it from here. Then I sat by the balcony door and listened for the far bell that tells the hour. It rang and the room did not change. The change had already happened. Peace was not a gift from someone else. Peace was the way I placed my chair and the way I held my cup and the way I answered the phone only when my spirit smiled first. Here is what I learned when the porch light went out and I had to light my own lamp. Family is not a title, it is a practice. It is dishes washed without being asked. It is a chair pulled out because a name matters. Peace is not the same as quiet. Quiet asks you to hold your breath. Peace teaches you how to breathe on purpose. Dignity does not shout. It packs quietly and moves the furniture in your soul until the room fits. Boundaries are not walls against love. They are doors with good hinges. A door is not unkind because it closes. It is wise because it can open again when respect knocks. Gratitude is not a leash. No one owes access for what has already been given. Love without respect turns into waiting rooms that never call your name. Respect without love becomes rules that scrape. The work is to hold them together. I learned that later is a country where promises go to get lost. I learned that a calendar can be a kindness or a cage depending on who holds the pen. I learned that forgiveness is not permission to repeat the same harm. It is the freedom to step into a day that does not carry yesterday like luggage. I learned that money can be a map when it serves your purpose, and that paperwork can preach when it protects your peace. I learned that grown children are still learning, and that a mother can love them without living on their porch. I learned that goodbyes can be gentle and permanent at the same time. I learned that a table set for honesty can feed a whole room. Most of all, I learned that I am still a full story when I am not cast as mother in someone else's scene. My name is enough even when no one calls it. My chair is welcome where I place it. My phone is a tool, not an altar. My voice is a bridge when I use it on time. If you are standing at a closed door with kindness cooling in your hands, hear me. Your worth is not outside. Your peace is inside. Choose boundaries. Choose respect. Choose a life that welcomes you and invites others in by example. Did this story speak to you? Maybe it reminded you of a time you had to start over, or taught you that peace can live quietly inside your own house. I would love to hear where you are listening from, and what part of the story stayed with you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be exactly what another person needs today. And if you want more stories about strength, dignity, and the kind of love that learns to let go, please subscribe and tap that little super thanks button. It helps keep the coffee warm and the stories coming, with love and respect.